I was thinking about a time when I was a kid that maybe might be relatable or completely unrelatable. Anybody have older brothers? Anybody with that blessing and that bruising of having older brothers? Growing up, I haven't changed a whole lot. I'm still pretty pale, and I showed marks really easily. So my brother didn't get away with hitting me too often without it being very obvious. And at one point, when I was probably around 8 years old, I made a very calculated decision. Uh, you know, I I had costumes as you do as a little kid, and one night I decided to become the Dark Knight, become Batman himself, and I put on this Batman cowl, put on my Batman cape, and I went and I hid in our bathroom because my brother would always jump at the slightest things, and then he would hit me. And I was like, you know what, I'm going to have fun with it tonight. And so I dressed up as Batman, and I waited what felt like an hour. I don't know how long it actually was. But we had these little, like a little a half wall where the toilet was in this bathroom. So I was around the wall, and I waited and I waited. And then he finally came in, and I jumped out. And I got a great scare out of him. It was fantastic. The problem, though, was he just turned the door shut right behind him. And I was locked in the bathroom with him to just receive the beating that was scaring him. And I might as well have been the Joker because I was laughing through it all because it was worth it to me in that moment. And if you're going to get hit, you might as well enjoy it, have something of value you were getting out of this exchange. And I think there's like a real point to this kind of a story, that there are some painful moments that happen in life, but when we focus on something bigger than the moment, it helps us to get to whatever we are hoping for, to survive into whatever we are longing for. And today we're going to talk about grit. And I want to ask the question today, what is worth holding on to even when it hurts? And so today we're going to finish our kind of journey with the story of Jacob and those around Jacob in the text and chase something better despite whatever pains may come along the way. And so I want to read for you from Genesis 32, verses 22 to 31. The text says that the same night, Jacob got up and he took his 2 wives and his 2 maids and his 11 children, and he crossed the ford of the Jabbok. And he took them and he sent them across the stream, and likewise everything that he had. Now Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. And when the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he struck him on the hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. And then he said, "Let me go, for the day is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." So he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." And then the man said, "You shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with humans and have prevailed." And then Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And there he blessed him. And so Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "For I have seen God face to face, yet my life is preserved." And the sun rose upon him as he passed Peniel, limping because of his hip. And therefore, to this day, the Israelites do not eat the thigh muscle that is on the hip socket, because he struck Jacob on the hip and his thigh muscle. The word of God for the people of the world. Thanks be to God. Now, this story, to catch you up on where Jacob has been, if you remember, he escaped his brother because he stole his brother's blessing, and he went into hiding, and he kind of went to a foreign land to his relatives, and he gets married, and it gets very complicated. But at some point, he decides to return home to Esau, and he decides that he is not really convinced that his brother is not going to hurt him when he returns home. And so he does kind of his favoritism game. He makes like waves of gifts for Esau, of maybe if Esau gets all of these gifts, he'll receive me better. And then he kind of groups his family according to how much he loves them, which is not great advice. But he's like, maybe if Esau takes his wrath out on my family, I can save the ones that I most love. It's messy. And so he's in this process, not very trusting of the people he's going to encounter. And he moves his family across this river to kind of re-enter the land that will be known as the land of Israel. And he's alone in the dark when, strangely enough, he's not actually alone. He encounters some mysterious man that is only announced to be like attacking him. He just starts wrestling. And that only makes sense to me in the framework of like brothers in a household that are just suddenly wrestling at any moment and you don't know why. But there they are. Jacob is wrestling this mysterious man. And I want to tell you, we have no clue who he's wrestling. The commentator tradition throughout the millennia have given every possible option. Maybe he's wrestling an unknown, just regular man, that this is his land or something, and he's just wrestling some unknown individual. Maybe he's wrestling God, which, you kind of take some of that hints away in the text. But if it's the God and he's also a man, well, maybe he's Jesus. The church fathers loved this kind of move. Maybe it's a little g God. It's another God. It's Elohim in the Hebrew, and that can be the great one God, or it can be kind of lesser deities or other gods. Maybe it's an angel. Maybe it's a demon. Maybe it's a folk spirit like a troll guarding the river crossing who can't stay out overnight. One of my favorites, there's a tradition that says it's an angelic presence that is like the patron angel of Esau. That it's like Esau is running out to meet Jacob and his angelic representation gets there first to wrestle with him through the night. Maybe it's the embodiment of Jacob himself, his own inner feelings, his own struggles, his own traumas, his own things he's got to work through. We don't always get to know who we're struggling with. It is hard to see in the night and in the dark. And sometimes we are so busy wrestling in the dark, we don't even know what we're wrestling with. And despite this never-ending wrestling match, whoever he's wrestling with decides, I've got something to do in the morning or something. I don't want to do this all day. And he decides, I'm going to kind of take his hip out. Now, I don't know if any of you have hip problems, but I'm sure you can feel this in the text of Jacob getting his hip kind of dislodged. I will tell you the NRSV, I think, tries to make it make sense to us and says that the man there struck him on the hip. This verb is actually like a gentle touch almost every time it ever occurs. And so it's either like a magic attack, like, boop, got you, or it's like a pressure point. But the idea is that this man did not have to try hard to just dislodge Jacob's hip. But that doesn't end the fight. Jacob, despite his hip being in pain and throbbing, doesn't give up. Because if you know anything about Jacob, when we were introduced to him, he's grasping his brother even at birth. He holds on, and that's the thing that he knows how to do. And so he holds on and he holds on. And this man, the stranger, asks him, like, hey, like, I need to let go. Who are you? And Jacob announces his name. But Jacob won't give up until he's blessed. And so he just keeps wrestling and wrestling. And he says, I'm not going to let you go unless you will bless me first. And so this man gives him a new name before he blesses him. He says, you're not just Jacob, which there's kind of like a wordplay in the Hebrew. It's like you're calling him a crooked man. Things are not straight for him, that it's kind of crooked. Instead of kind of pursuing things in this crooked way, now you will be called Israel, for you have striven with God and with humans and have prevailed. Now, the text gives you a little kind of a neat, tidy version of what Israel might mean. The academic conversation gets much more convoluted. If you're familiar with names that have God attached to them, God is almost always the subject of the action in the text. And so scholars will tell you that Israel should mean God has prevailed. And I think in typical Jacob fashion, we go, no, not God has prevailed. Jacob has wrestled and prevailed. Jacob, I think, feels a little strong about himself in the story. And so this text is giving Jacob some sort of new name. Hopefully, the dark night of the soul, this kind of dark journey and wrestling match, will lead to something new and not just the same old struggle, not the same problems, not the same challenges. And so Jacob gets to walk away with a new name. I will let you know that the later texts don't just call him Israel from here on out. His old name kind of prevails, keeps lingering in the story. But Jacob walks away from this wrestling match towards the sun. The dawn is arriving. The mysterious wrestler vanishes. The night did not last forever. He walks into new life. But the text is honest to say that he limps away. Just because we walk into new life, into new hope, does not mean we still don't sometimes bring with us the pains of what preceded it. And he walks away kind of with the lingering effects of this wrestling match. But he does walk away with a blessing. And I appreciate that this story, Jacob isn't going to let a good story go to waste. He's going to tell everybody about it. And so he's going to live with a new testimony, a new story. I wrestled with God face to face and I survived. Again, he feels like he knows what happened in this story. I wrestled with God, God's self. I feel like it's a little bit like one of those fishing stories. It just keeps getting exaggerated each time it gets told. I mean, who else was there? Nobody else got to see what happened. But I appreciate that Jacob names this place after seeing God face to face and persevering. He sees his own name as doing that same thing. But he doesn't just hold on to the story for himself. We get this weird time jump in the story that the narrator of the story stops telling you what's happening in the moment and then goes to the future and says, this is why the children of Israel don't eat this kind of meat on the hip bone. It fast forwards to say that Jacob has taught his children to remember this moment in the way that they kind of practice their dietary practices. Don't eat that part of the meat. Why? Well, you had an ancestor who got hit on the hip. And I'm sure the tale grows larger every time you tell it. But I appreciate that Jacob did not hide his own struggles. He shares them. In part, we have all of the wonderfulness of the messiness of these stories because someone kept telling these kinds of messy stories. And how important it is for us to not hide the messiness of our lives, but to tell our stories so that they might encourage the next person. And I think about the way in which the people who've gone before us have told us that it is okay to be vulnerable, to share our own wrestling stories. You may have heard of the 16th century Spanish monk named St. John of the Cross. He's the one that coined the phrase, the dark night of the soul. He was a part of some religious kind of changing of some practices and customs, and that doesn't always get received well. And so his kind of superiors imprisoned him in Toledo because they did not like how strict his religious kind of inclinations were. And so he coins this term that for us has kind of just been translated into a significant spiritual or emotional crisis, a moment of like a sense of dread, of loneliness. And I think about my own dark night of the soul. I've shared with you that I lost my father who passed away when I was 9 to cancer. And you don't really process things as the 9-year-old. You jump out as Batman at your brother at that age. It takes a while to think through your pains. And my mom remarried, and everybody in our household had trauma. Everybody had their own problems. 2 of my brothers and sisters, and both my brother and my stepsister, were kicked out of our house in their teenage years. Everybody was struggling. And for me, I got really, really depressed. Like life just was not fun. It felt like night lingered. It felt exhausting. And you wrestled with things like, why on earth does this happen to me? Like, God, why is this way? And you don't know what things trigger you. It's like going to a friend's birthday party and their parents are there with them. And you're like, oh, I wish I had a nice image of just your family all getting along. But I think when you're in those moments, you feel trapped because you don't see a sense of hope. You feel alone. You could be in a room full of messy people and still feel very, very alone. And for me, I think about like my journey with God and what I wrestled with God. It's like, where is God in the midst of pain, in the midst of sorrow, in the midst of grief? And I remember feeling so helped with the image of just Jesus weeping over his friend dying. That God is not the God at a distance who doesn't care, but God doesn't mind being there wrestling at the river edge. God doesn't mind being there crying for the lost, for those who've died, those who are hurt. And I feel like what opened the world up to me was knowing God was big enough to handle whatever things I wanted to shout or be angry about or to be depressed about, that God was big enough to handle those things. I feel like we make a fragile image of God in our world where we make people feel like you can't bring your honest questions, your honest doubts, your honest prayers. But I love, you know, side note on the narrative, even if it's not God on the riverside there wrestling with Jacob, the image that the church has kind of taken from that, of that God is the God who's willing to wrestle with you, and you can go all night, and guess what? It's okay. And it's just a gentle touch. God could kind of knock you out of whack and change your whole identity and bless you in the midst of it all. And so I think about when you're changed by those things, you're like, I never want to go back to that way of living, that way of thinking. Like, I can't see God the same way. And so my journey with God was changed in the midst of wrestling as a teenager. And so I think about the ways that I honor that, the ways that I walk forward with that. But the main thing is just to be able to be open to share those stories, to let other people know it's okay for you to wrestle with those things. It's okay for you to not know how to make it through the night, but just keep holding on with God. No matter how difficult life feels, let your prayer life be honest enough to wrestle with God so that you might be so unrelenting that you will keep wrestling with God until you find the blessing in the middle of the dark. It's very easy to have a faith in the midst of all of the great moments of life. If you get the job promotion, you have the family that you want, whatever it is, like faith feels like it can be super easy. But in the darkest nights, you are not suddenly farther off from God. You are not alone. You don't have to hide your feelings, your thoughts, your emotions from God. And so I would encourage you to let your prayer be honest with God. What are we doing if our own prayer life can't be honest? One of the best blessings that we have is a scripture filled with psalms that are prayers that are very messy. Uh, there's some ugly psalms about what he hopes for his enemies and all sorts of things, but they are very honest. And it is okay to bring your honest feelings to God. You know, the difference between kind of cult-like behavior and what the church is called to be is you don't have to just receive everything without questions or doubts or struggles. You don't have to be alone. We can do this journey of questions together and with God. And so I would encourage you that no matter how bleak of a situation, no matter how difficult life gets, don't give up wrestling with God and holding on until you can find where there's blessing in the midst of the darkness. Blessing does not mean happy-go-lucky. There's no problems in the world. You might still have hip pain and limp through life, but you will find blessings even in the midst of the darkest night. And I think about the woman in Jesus' parable that we read from earlier in Luke 14. The power of not just giving up on a prayer when it doesn't work one time, but continuing to show up to God, continuing to show up to each other, to keep praying and persisting, to have some sort of spiritual grit, not to just like endure pain for the sake of pain, but to endure for something life-giving and truthful and loving. So today I want to invite you to think about, what do you need to hold on to with spiritual grit in your life right now? What is worth holding on to even when it hurts? Is there a prayer that you're like, I just don't know if I have the energy to keep praying this thing? Is it a question you've been afraid to ask and you're like, don't give up on the question? Is it a relationship that needs an honest conversation? Hold on to whatever life-giving thing God might have in front of you. But I also want to invite you to release, not every wrestling match needs to be a wrestling match forever. Some things need to be let go because they are harming you with no blessing. And so some people have been mistakenly told to endure some sort of abusive environment, or to endure discrimination quietly, or just pray harder instead of getting any medical care. There's all sorts of twisted versions of like It's okay to let go of some of those wrestling matches and find life in a new place with new boundaries. But find what is valuable to hold on to and release where there is no blessing, but also share in this journey. Share with God. If you are in the midst of some difficulty, I would encourage you just to spend, pick whatever feels reasonable for you. Can you give yourself 5 minutes, 10 minutes of journaling, of praying, of whatever is needed to be honest with God? You could say, God, here is what I don't understand. God, here is what hurts. God, here's what I'm afraid will never change. And I encourage you, don't think you're going to solve anything in 5 or 10 minutes. But the goal is to remain engaged with God and not alone, to keep wrestling. And if you're really courageous, you can take that and share it beyond your God time with somebody that you trust in your life, to tell one person, like, hey, I don't need you to solve this. Please hear me before I tell you what I'm wrestling with. You don't have to solve this for me, but can I be honest with you about what I'm wrestling with, what I'm trying to work on? Can we hold on to what gives life even when it's hard? Can we release what causes harm? Can we not wrestle alone? Can we imagine if we did this together, if we didn't pretend that every prayer had to be answered, if every Bible passage had to make sense, or every relationship could be repaired? Imagine a church where we could practice spiritual grit together. This story does not tell us that the struggle of life will not hurt, but it does tell us that there is something valuable in refusing to let the hurt decide what is worth loving, seeking, and becoming. I appreciate that Jacob's kind of like his relentlessness, his unrelenting nature, gives us a little glimpse of, like, maybe it's okay to be a little persistent in life. Maybe it's okay to seek a new name, a new chapter, a new blessing. And so I would encourage you to keep limping towards the dawn. If that's all that you can do, is limp your way there. And maybe you got some friends that you can kind of lean on. No matter what, you have God to lean on, and to keep walking and limping towards the light, towards dawn, towards God's imagination for what comes next, because it is worth every single step.